Donald Trump's calling our Somali neighbors garbage and the state of Minnesota a hellhole is I'm assuming is untrue.
What if someone enforces Sharia law? There's a lot of talk of that.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
There's a lot of talk about people in Minnesota are terrified that someone's going to enforce Sharia law in a lot of these Somali Muslim areas where giant Muslim populations are.
We are doctors, we are teachers, entrepreneurs. We are elected representatives of our...
So apparently Tim Walz's legacy survived elections, but it didn't survive a Joe Rogan rant. One conversation, zero mercy, and suddenly people started asking questions nobody wanted answered. What set Rogan off? Why did this spiral so fast? And how did a casual chat turn into a full-on legacy check? Stick around, because this clip is uncomfortable, funny, and proof that a microphone can be way more dangerous than any debate.
This video of Tim Walz doing the exact same thing.
Right.
Exact same thing, and
Yes.
he said, of course, it's a Nazi salute. He said that.
Right.
We spent 3 days debating, having them trying to debate that President Musk gave a Nazi salute. Of course he did. But that is a distraction.
This is how crazy things have gotten. Like,
It's coordinated.
you haven't seen that?
No.
The video of him taking down the Minnesota flag.
If you're enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think. The moment Joe Rogan started circling Tim Walz's legacy, something subtle but kind of perfect happened. No fireworks, no yelling, just that slow, creeping feeling of, oh, we're really doing this? It's the kind of moment where a politician's mental filing cabinet starts jamming because someone isn't following the usual script.
Walz is out there talking again.
You say you could fight any Trump supporter?
Yeah.
I think I could kick most of their ass. I do think that if they wanted to. I know I can outrun them, but I don't know if we're going to fall into that place where we want to.
He says he kicked their ass, and they're scared of him because he could fix a truck. Like they're threatened by his masculinity. I know how to fix a truck. So he said, like, do you?
I think I scare them a little bit why they spend so much time on it. But no, I'm serious because I can fix a truck. They know I'm not bullshitting on this.
Yeah.
I'm not putting this in people's grill.
I bet you don't.
The lady doth protest too
I
much.
bet you don't.
This wasn't a shouting match or some viral gotcha clip cooked up in a dark editing room. It was worse. It was curiosity with stamina. Joe Rogan didn't accuse. He just wandered. And as he did, Tim Walz's carefully polished legacy started to feel less like a monument and more like an IKEA bookshelf put together at 2 a.m.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who was running for vice president.
I'd never seen this before. People driving by my house and using the R word in front of people. This is shameful.
They just passed something in Minnesota where illegal immigrants are allowed to have driver's licenses and vote, which is kind of crazy.
And I have yet to see an elected official, a Republican elected official, say, you're right, that's shameful.
A lot of the reason for wanting an open border is congressional seats.
So look, I'm worried. We know how these things go. They start with taunts, they turn to violence.
Because one of the things about when you do a census, it doesn't...
At first, everything sounded fine, even respectful. Tim Walz's record hung in the air like a resume being read at a networking event. Accomplishments got polite nods. Decisions stood tall. But Joe Rogan has a way of doing something quietly unsettling. He asks what happens after the headline.
I think they're lost. I mean, they're also lost in that they can't control the narrative anymore. I think when they had control of Twitter and they had control of essentially all of social media and pre-Trump, they had the reins like firmly held. They were in control of the public narrative. If you strayed from that, you will be kicked off social media. You'll be banned from YouTube. And for things that were factually correct. Like the lab leak theory is now finally being...
That's when the room temperature changed. Joe Rogan didn't cast Tim Walz as a villain or a hero. He treated him like a human with a long career and a bunch of convenient summaries attached. And nothing makes a legacy sweat faster than being treated like it's open source. Suddenly, Tim Walz's past wasn't being applauded, it was being examined. Not aggressively, just casually, like someone flipping over a product box to read the fine print. You could almost feel the moment Tim realized this conversation wasn't about praise, it was about patterns. Legacies love distance. They survive on time, speeches, and selective memory. Joe Rogan collapses that distance. He drags the past into the present and makes it answer for itself. No teleprompter required. At one point, the energy shifted from confidence to calculation. Tim wasn't defending anything outright. He was navigating. choosing words carefully, rearranging emphasis, and turning firm statements into flexible explanations. The kind of verbal gymnastics you only see when someone realizes their Wikipedia summary doesn't cover the follow-up questions.
Well, you have Tim Walz is your VP?
weird.
You don't think that guy's weird?
Elon's on that stage, jumping around, skipping like a dip. You know it.
He's weird in every way. The way he walks, the way he waves his hands.
He reminds me of the clown emoji.
This has only renewed the call for Governor Tim Walz to resign.
He's a bizarre guy.
He's a strange dude.
He is currently running for a third term as governor, but this has really ramped up under his watch. There's all of this fraud exploding onto the national scene. I think it's 5 or 6 federal investigations that have now been announced in Minnesota.
Joe Rogan, meanwhile, stayed calm. That's the part that really gets people. No dramatic pauses, no raised voice, just steady curiosity and a refusal to skip over the uncomfortable parts. Like a guy gently tapping a glass to see where it cracks. And cracks don't mean collapse, they mean inspection. Tim Walz's legacy didn't fall apart, it wobbled. And wobbling is far more interesting, because wobbling invites conversation. It makes people ask why some choices were celebrated while others quietly ended up in the context folder. This is where the internet leaned in, because nothing pulls attention faster than watching a legacy lose autopilot. Clips started spreading, not because Tim said something outrageous, but because he didn't. Every answer was doing 3 jobs at once: explaining the past, protecting the present, and not blowing up the future. Rogan kept pulling threads, not tearing fabric, just tugging enough to see what moved. Tim responded like someone realizing the chat had shifted from ceremonial to real conversation. That's when the legacy started sounding tired, not defeated, just worn from carrying the same story uphill for years. And then someone asked the real question: was the hill actually necessary? Joe Rogan didn't attack intentions. He questioned outcomes. And outcomes are the one thing a legacy can't argue with emotionally.
I'm doing something right when the Fox News crowd is all bitching at me like crazy. Like, I'm loving it.
That guy was almost the vice president of the United States.
Elon Musk was crying last week. Tim is being mean to me, basically, you know, like, yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that thing where it shows Obama saying, I need a vice president that's dumber than me.
He may or may not have cognitive decline problems at his age, but at her age, she's just dumb.
Biden and Biden saying I need a vice president dumber than me.
Great. Kamala Harris may be the dumbest person ever elected.
Because intentions are feelings, outcomes are receipts. Tim Walz leaned into nuance, usually a safe landing spot. But nuance under a microscope starts to look like fog. Joe Rogan didn't dismiss it, he asked how it actually played out in the real world. And that's when explanations started multiplying. One answer led to another clarification, which led to historical context, which led to bigger forces, which led to, well, it's complicated. Complicated is honest, but it's also contagious. Once complicated enters the conversation, certainty quietly slips out. The audience noticed. Comments filled with variations of, I didn't know that, and why isn't anyone talking about this? Not outrage, just genuine interest. That pause is powerful. It forces reflection. It forces someone like Tim Walz to face how much of his story is self-told versus collectively experienced. And when those two versions don't line up perfectly, things get awkward. Not scandalous awkward, human awkward. The kind where you realize your greatest hits album skipped a few tracks people remember all too clearly.
Tim Walz, if that guy got into power.
And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Like if Kamala died and Tim Walz, Tampon Tim, was our president.
I used to think the Democrats were crazy for saying that men have periods, but then I met Tim Walz.
You know how crazy this country would be?
These guys come up with the weirdest damn ideas that you will ever imagine. You know it's true.
That weirdo who puts tampons in the boys' room. What about our...
Meanwhile, Joe Rogan never positioned himself as the authority. That's the trick. He stayed the curious listener, which meant Tim Walz had to do the explaining. Explaining your own legacy in real time is like narrating a movie while it's still playing. You're never quite sure which scene people are watching. As the conversation went on, Tim's tone shifted from declarative to reflective. Less, this is what happened. More, this is how it looked at the time. Fair. But fairness doesn't erase questions. It sparks more of them. Joe Rogan didn't pile on. He let silence do the work. And silence is loud when expectations are high. By the end, nothing was resolved. No winner, no viral knockout. Just a legacy rotated slightly, revealing angles people hadn't considered. Tim Walz wasn't exposed, he was contextualized. And context is dangerous, because it strips away simplicity. Somewhere out there, a microphone is warming up again. And that's the clever part of what Joe Rogan did to Tim Walz's legacy. He didn't kick the door down, he opened a window.
The other thing was when they decided that J.D. Vance was weird.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
He calls me weird, but then he lies about how his kids were conceived. Who does that? That's just the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
And then they're just weirds everywhere.
Weird. Oh, you don't want a weird guy. Meanwhile, you have fucking Tim Walz. Is your
Super
VP? You don't think that guy's weird?
Super weird.
Because Minnesota, I mean, they picked this guy. He is weird. Right? He's weird. I'm not weird. He's weird.
He's weird in every way.
Yeah.
The way he...
And once fresh air gets in, people start noticing how stuffy the room really was. Legacies are like climate-controlled environments, curated, maintained, and carefully dusted by staffers and supporters who know exactly which angles photograph well. Joe Rogan doesn't care about the lighting. He flips the switch and lets the shadows sort themselves out. Suddenly, Tim Walz found himself in that uncomfortable space where past decisions stop being bullet points and start being conversations. Not debates, real conversations. The kind that don't end when the clock runs out or the applause cue hits. The kind that lingers. Rogan didn't ask Tim to defend every choice. He asked him to sit with them. And once that mismatch is noticed, it's impossible to unsee. Tim wasn't flustered in the dramatic sense. No meltdown, no visible panic. It was subtler, the calm that comes from realizing you're no longer steering the narrative. You're sharing the wheel. And Joe Rogan is famously allergic to backseat driving.
Walz said that the First Amendment doesn't apply to misinformation or hate speech. Okay, well, it certainly does.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Sometimes people say things wrong, and the goal of the First Amendment is you say something wrong, and then this guy who's an expert says the right thing.
I've stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. It's back.
Well, so much of it turns out to be true. How about masks don't work? You would get screamed at for masks.
Every time Tim Walz tried to frame his legacy in broader terms, Joe Rogan gently pulled it back to the specifics. Not as accusations, but as anchors. Anchors that stop stories from floating too far above reality. That's when the audience really leaned in. People are tired of floating narratives. They want gravity. They want weight. They want to see how decisions ripple outward, not just upward. Rogan understands this instinctively. Tim Walz understands it academically. And those are two very different things. As the conversation unfolded, Tim's legacy started to sound less like a finished chapter and more like an ongoing footnote. Not rewritten, just re-examined. And re-examination always feels personal, even when it isn't. Rogan never painted Tim as uniquely flawed. Tim found himself explaining not just what he did, but why people might feel differently about it today. That's a dangerous exercise for any legacy, because time is undefeated. What sounded decisive years ago can sound evasive now.
Walz tried to claim that his wife got pregnant through in vitro fertilization, and she said that's not true. So he lied about that.
Some of you might have heard this. This is very personal for my wife and I. When Gwen and I decided to have children, we went through years of fertility treatments. And I remember each night praying that the call was going to come and it was going to be good news. The phone would ring, tenseness in my stomach, and then the agony when you heard the treatments hadn't worked.
The First Lady of Minnesota, Gwen Walz, revealed that she underwent a different fertility treatment, not IVF, called intrauterine.
What felt pragmatic back then can feel cold now. Joe Rogan let that contrast breathe. He didn't rush to judgment. He gave Tim Walz enough time to speak for the tension to form naturally. And tension didn't come from hostility. It came from honesty bumping up against expectation. At some point, the legacy stopped being just about Tim Walz and started being about the system that rewards simplicity and punishes reflection. Rogan never said it out loud. He didn't need to. The implication hung there, heavy and clear. Tim, to his credit, didn't retreat into slogans. He leaned into the explanation. But explanations have limits, especially when people are already questioning the framing. That's when the conversation shifted again, from what Tim intended to how Rogan's audience received it, even if it looked calm on the surface. Rogan thrives in that quiet. He doesn't fill it with conclusions. He fills it with space, and space is where people make up their own minds. That's the real threat to any legacy, not criticism, but autonomy.
A complete pathological liar.
Let's be honest, there are outsiders coming into communities, stealing and moving jobs away, and making life harder for people living there. And they have names, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Complete liar. Lied about being in Tiananmen Square, lied about being a head coach of a football team.
Because this started, and I love this story, as a young prosecutor. Kamala Harris talked about going in that courtroom for the first time.
Pathological liars, people that are habitual liars, they just lie all the time about everything.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't deploy for war. You didn't. Why?
By now, Tim Walz's legacy wasn't being judged, it was being handled. Passed from listener to listener, each adding their own interpretation. Joe Rogan acted less like an interrogator and more like a courier, delivering questions and letting people decide what to do with them. And the internet did what it always does when ambiguity appears. It overanalyzed everything. Short clips turned into long threads. Long threads turned into amateur think pieces. Tim Walz's name started showing up alongside words like reevaluation and reconsideration. Not condemnation, reconsideration. The most frustrating word in politics. It doesn't let you settle, it keeps you thinking. Rogan didn't crown himself the arbiter of Tim's legacy. He positioned himself as a mirror. And mirrors don't attack, they reflect. Sometimes at unflattering angles. He didn't rescue Tim from the awkwardness, he let it exist, giving the moment credibility. There's a strange honesty that comes when someone realizes they're being listened to, not judged. Tim seemed to hit that realization mid-conversation. Defensiveness softened, language slowed, and the legacy stopped performing, it started reflecting. That reflection didn't offer tidy conclusions, it offered complexity. And complexity is kryptonite for viral narratives, which made the whole thing even more compelling. Instead of a clear takeaway, people were left with a question.